The desperate situation. Hook. The galaxy was in chaos. Far beyond the borders of the known civilizations, the cries for help echoed through the stars. Alien races, once powerful and thriving, were now on the edge of extinction. Their worlds, once safe and prosperous, were being torn apart by an unstoppable force. No one could predict the horrors that would come next. It all began when a mysterious enemy appeared, a species unlike any the galaxy had ever encountered. They had no name, no face, only an overwhelming hunger for destruction. Their fleet was massive, moving with terrifying precision. They didn't just conquer planets, they wiped them off the map, erasing every trace of civilization. For every planet they encountered, it was the same. The cities fell, the inhabitants scattered, and those who survived were left to watch their homes turn to dust. The aliens in the galaxy, the peaceful and mighty ones, found themselves helpless. A once proud species known for their advanced technology and vast knowledge had never faced anything like this. They had weapons, fleets, and brilliant minds, but none of it seemed to matter when faced with such a relentless force. One by one, their colonies fell. Systems that once flourished with life were now graves for those who once called them home. The situation grew worse every day. There was no hope. No one knew how to stop the oncoming wave of destruction. The alien races, in their fear and desperation, began to send out distress signals, calls for help. They reached out to their allies, to any civilizations that might have the strength to fight back, but the answer was always the same. There was nothing that could be done. Their pleas went unanswered. Among the species that found themselves in peril were the Xantorians, a race known for their intelligence and their peaceful nature. They had once been the shining beacon of hope in the galaxy, always helping those in need. Now their once glorious cities were in ruins, and their people were scattered and hiding in the depths of their planets. One Xantorian leader, General Threx, sat in the dimly lit war room of their final stronghold. The holographic images of destroyed cities flickered on the screen in front of him. He could barely make out the faces of his people, fear, desperation, and hopelessness written in their eyes. His heart sank as he looked at the message once more. The enemy is too strong. We cannot win. Our final colony is about to fall. The once great empire, reduced to this, a broken shell of what it once was. General Threx clenched his fists. The knowledge that his people were on the verge of extinction filled him with a cold anger. He had lost everything. His family, his friends, his people. It was all being wiped out by this force. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming despair, a small glimmer of hope burned in his chest. There had to be someone out there who could help. He thought back to the legends, the stories his ancestors had told of a fierce warrior race, a race that thrived in environments far harsher than any civilized world. They were the Deathworlders, humans. Threx had heard of them, but never truly believed in their power. Humans were said to be chaotic, unpredictable, and fiercely territorial. They were known for their bravery in battle, but also their recklessness. Still, the stories of their victories in countless wars, their fearlessness, and their unyielding strength lingered in the back of his mind. Could they be the ones to save them? He glanced at the map of the galaxy. Their situation was dire. Every system that had been a part of their empire had already fallen. There was nothing left to lose. The Deathworlders were known to be mercenaries and warriors, but would they answer a plea for help from a race they didn't even know? Would they come to the aid of a species on the verge of total destruction? With no other options left, Threx made his decision. He would send out the call. The message would be simple, but urgent. Help us. The galaxy is dying. We need warriors. We need the Deathworlders. As the message was sent, Threx knew this could be their last hope. He could already hear the enemy ships approaching, the final wave ready to crush what little remained of their civilization. The seconds ticked by, each one bringing them closer to annihilation. His fingers trembled as he hit the send button. He had no idea if anyone would receive the message. He had no idea if anyone would come. But as he looked out at the broken world of his people, he knew that he had done everything he could. He had given them a chance, no matter how small. If the Deathworlders existed as the legend said, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could be the ones to turn the tide. Threx stood tall, trying to steady his breath. The battle was coming, and he had no idea what the future would bring. But one thing was certain. The galaxy was about to face a power it had never seen before. The Deathworlders were coming. General Threx paced back and forth in the war room, his mind racing. He had sent the distress signal, and now there was nothing more to do but wait. His people, once proud and powerful, were now huddled in the shadows of their final refuge, the last remnants of their civilization clinging to life. But even in the depths of despair, there was a flicker of hope. The waiting felt endless. Hours turned into days, and still no word came from the Deathworlders. The silence was deafening. Threx's thoughts began to grow darker. Had the message been lost in space? Was the galaxy so far gone that even the fabled warriors wouldn't bother to help? He stared at the screens displaying the approaching enemy fleet. There was no time left. The last stronghold, their last chance at survival, was on the verge of being overrun. Their fleet was no match for the enemy's overwhelming numbers. The destruction would be swift and merciless. But just as hope seemed to fade completely, the faintest signal appeared on the comm screen. Threx's heart skipped a beat. The signal was coming from the farthest corner of the galaxy, where the Deathworlders were said to dwell. The message was brief, almost too short to comprehend. "We're on our way." That was it. No explanation, no promises, just the cold certainty of action. The Deathworlders were coming. Threx's eyes widened in disbelief. Could it be true? Could the humans really be coming to their aid? His heart filled with a mixture of relief and wariness. The stories of these warriors had always been cloaked in myth, their power and ferocity spoken of in hushed tones. Some said they were savages, ruthless and unpredictable, while others claimed they were a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. Either way, one thing was clear. If the Deathworlders were indeed on their way, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. As Threx made his way to the command center, his thoughts were a whirlwind. What would they be like? What could they do? Could they really stand against the unstoppable force that had brought the galaxy to the brink of annihilation? He arrived at the command center just in time to see a fleet of ships appear on the outer edges of the galaxy, their lights flickering through the dark void of space. The Deathworlders had arrived. The battle was about to begin. The ships that emerged were unlike anything Threx had ever seen. Their design was crude, rough, and undeniably menacing. They weren't sleek or refined like the vessels of the more advanced alien species. No, these ships were built for one thing: survival. They were heavily armored, covered in battle scars, and armed to the teeth with weapons that could obliterate entire fleets in moments. It was impossible to miss the contrast between the elegant, advanced ships of the galaxy's remaining civilizations and these human vessels. While the others were smooth and polished, these ships looked like they had been thrown together in haste, each one a testament to the hard-won victories of its crew. The ships came to a halt near the last remaining stronghold. Threx's eyes remained fixed on the fleet as the Deathworlders' ships opened their hatches, revealing their inhabitants. And then, the most shocking sight of all, the humans. They were unlike the calm, composed alien leaders Threx had grown accustomed to. These humans were loud, energetic, and full of life. They were dressed in rugged uniforms, their expressions filled with determination, even as they surveyed the looming threat before them. Every single human appeared ready for battle. Their presence alone sent a wave of energy through the Xantorian forces. If the Deathworlders could face this enemy with such confidence, perhaps there was hope after all. One human stepped forward. His build was tall, his posture straight, and his eyes locked on the enemy fleet. Threx immediately recognized him as a leader. His face was stern, but there was a fire in his eyes, a fire that signaled he would not back down. He spoke into a comm device, his voice firm and clear. Target locked. Weapons hot. Prepare to engage. As the words echoed through the room, Threx could sense the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The humans were ready. This was their element. The battle would no longer be fought in fear or desperation. The Deathworlders had arrived, and with them, the galaxy had just been given a second chance. For the first time in what felt like forever, Threx allowed himself a moment of optimism. Perhaps this would be the turning point. Perhaps these humans, with their unpredictable and unyielding nature, could change the tide of the war. The enemy fleet approached quickly, but now, the Deathworlders were in position. The humans were not only ready, they were eager, and as the first shots rang out across the galaxy, the sound of battle was like music to Threx's ears. The galaxy's fate was about to change. The Deathworlders had come, and they weren't backing down. The enemy would soon know what it meant to face the wrath of the humans. Part 2. The Unlikely Response. General Threx paced back and forth in the war room, his mind racing. He had sent the distress signal, and now there was nothing more to do but wait. His people, once proud and powerful, were now huddled in the shadows of their final refuge, the last remnants of their civilization clinging to life. But even in the depths of despair, there was a flicker of hope. The waiting felt endless. Hours turned into days, and still no word came from the Deathworlders. The silence was deafening. Threx's thoughts began to grow darker. Had the message been lost in space? Was the galaxy so far gone that even the fabled warriors wouldn't bother to help? He stared at the screens displaying the approaching enemy fleet. There was no time left. The last stronghold, their last chance at survival, was on the verge of being overrun. Their fleet was no match for the enemy's overwhelming numbers. The destruction would be swift and merciless. But just as hope seemed to fade completely, the faintest signal appeared on the comm screen. Threx's heart skipped a beat. The signal was coming from the farthest corner of the galaxy, where the Deathworlders were said to dwell. The message was brief, almost too short to comprehend. "We're on our way." That was it. No explanation, no promises, just the cold certainty of action. The Deathworlders were coming. Threx's eyes widened in disbelief. Could it be true? Could the humans really be coming to their aid? His heart filled with a mixture of relief and wariness. The stories of these warriors had always been cloaked in myth, their power and ferocity spoken of in hushed tones. Some said they were savages, ruthless, and unpredictable, while others claimed they were a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. Either way, one thing was clear. If the Deathworlders were indeed on their way, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. As Threx made his way to the command center, his thoughts were a whirlwind. What would they be like? What could they do? Could they really stand against the unstoppable force that had brought the galaxy to the brink of annihilation? He arrived at the command center just in time to see a fleet of ships appear on the outer edges of the galaxy, their lights flickering through the dark void of space. The Deathworlders had arrived. The battle was about to begin. The ships that emerged were unlike anything Threx had ever seen. Their design was crude, rough, and undeniably menacing. They weren't sleek or refined like the vessels of the more advanced alien species. No, these ships were built for one thing: survival. They were heavily armored, covered in battle scars, and armed to the teeth with weapons that could obliterate entire fleets in moments. It was impossible to miss the contrast between the elegant, advanced ships of the galaxy's remaining civilizations and these human vessels. While the others were smooth and polished, these ships looked like they had been thrown together in haste, each one a testament to the hard-won victories of its crew. The ships came to a halt near the last remaining stronghold. Threx's eyes remained fixed on the fleet as the Deathworlders' ships opened their hatches, revealing their inhabitants. And then, the most shocking sight of all, the humans. They were unlike the calm, composed alien leaders Threx had grown accustomed to. These humans were loud, energetic, and full of life. They were dressed in rugged uniforms, their expressions filled with determination, even as they surveyed the looming threat before them. Every single human appeared ready for battle. Their presence alone sent a wave of energy through the Xantorian forces. If the Deathworlders could face this enemy with such confidence, perhaps there was hope after all. One human stepped forward. His build was tall, his posture straight, and his eyes locked on the enemy fleet. Threx immediately recognized him as a leader. His face was stern, but there was a fire in his eyes, a fire that signaled he would not back down. He spoke into a comm device, his voice firm and clear. Target locked. Weapons hot. Prepare to engage. As the words echoed through the room, Threx could sense the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The humans were ready. This was their element. The battle would no longer be fought in fear or desperation. The Deathworlders had arrived, and with them, the galaxy had just been given a second chance. For the first time in what felt like forever, Threx allowed himself a moment of optimism. Perhaps this would be the turning point. Perhaps these humans, with their unpredictable and unyielding nature, could change the tide of the war. The enemy fleet approached quickly, but now, the Deathworlders were in position. The humans were not only ready, they were eager. And as the first shots rang out across the galaxy, the sound of battle was like music to Threx's ears. The galaxy's fate was about to change. The Deathworlders had come, and they weren't backing down. The enemy would soon know what it meant to face the wrath of the humans. In this section, suspense builds as the Deathworlders arrive, setting the stage for the coming conflict. The aliens who were once desperate now find themselves in a position of hope, unsure but ready for the unexpected power the humans might bring to the battlefield. As the first wave of Deathworlder ships surged forward, Threx's heart raced with anticipation. The war room was a buzz of frantic activity as the galaxy's final hope prepared to face the inevitable onslaught. The Xantorian fleet, already battered and bruised, was no match for the enemy they faced. But with the Deathworlders' arrival, everything had changed. Targeting systems locked, a young officer announced, his voice quivering with excitement. Weapons primed and ready. We're going to hit them hard. Threx barely heard the officer's words. His gaze was fixed on the human fleet. These warriors were something else entirely. The way they operated their ships, efficient, fearless, was a sharp contrast to the alien tactics the Xantorians were used to. There was no hesitation, no planning in the face of an uncertain future. They had arrived and instantly taken charge, turning the tide of the battle with their raw power and sheer will. The first shots from the Deathworlder fleet lit up the sky like stars colliding. Threx could hardly believe his eyes. The humans' weapons weren't sophisticated in the traditional sense. They weren't lasers or energy-based beams, but blunt, brutal projectiles that tore through the enemy's shields with ease. It was as though the Deathworlders had a deep understanding of warfare, one that only the fiercest, most desperate battles could teach. The Xantorian fleet had been prepared for sophisticated and precise strikes. Instead, they were met with explosive force, with human ships charging forward like wild beasts, their weapons firing without mercy. It wasn't just a battle, it was a statement. The Deathworlders had come to dominate, and they would accept nothing less than victory. The human ships swarmed like a relentless storm, dodging incoming fire with an agility that Threx couldn't believe. Every move they made was calculated, every attack deliberate. But there was something else, something intangible in their approach. It was the spirit of their people, their undying resolve to survive at all costs. It was as if they were born for moments like these, moments when survival meant pushing past the limits of what was thought possible. The enemy fleet, initially confident in their numbers, began to falter. The first few ships took direct hits from the humans' weapons, their shields flickering before collapsing. The Deathworlders' ships closed in, tearing through the enemy's defenses one by one. Their tactics weren't the work of highly trained strategists or cutting-edge technology. No, it was their passion, an unyielding drive to fight and win, that gave them the upper hand. Keep pressing forward. We're not stopping. The leader of the human fleet commanded, his voice a gravelly yet reassuring sound over the comms. His words reverberated with a power that Threx couldn't help but admire. He wasn't just giving orders, he was inspiring his crew to give everything they had. The Deathworlders weren't simply fighting to win, they were fighting for something greater. As the battle raged on, Threx watched in awe as the human fleet continued to push the enemy back. Each explosion was a testament to their sheer willpower. The Deathworlders' ships moved with a precision that belied their crude, rugged appearance. They didn't need fancy technology or intricate planning. They had something much more powerful, a burning desire to win at any cost. The Xantorian ships, once proud and fearsome, were now falling back. Threx could see it in their eyes. They were scared. The might of the Deathworlder fleet was too much. What was once a seemingly endless war was now spiraling into an overwhelming defeat for the enemy. Just as Threx began to feel the hope that had been absent for so long, a sudden burst of static on the comms interrupted his thoughts. He quickly turned to the officer handling communications. "Report," Threx barked. The officer's eyes widened in fear. "The enemy? They've activated their final weapon," he stammered. "It's a massive energy pulse coming from their flagship." Threx's heart sank. If the Xantorians unleashed their weapon, it could wipe out the entire Deathworlder fleet in an instant. The power of the blast was enough to obliterate anything in its path. It was a desperate move, but it was one that could turn the tide back in the enemy's favor. Without hesitation, Threx turned his gaze back to the battlefield. The Xantorian flagship was charging up its weapon, its core glowing ominously. The countdown had begun. "Move," Threx shouted to his crew. "We need to get those humans to act fast." But just as the energy pulse began to build, a chilling voice echoed over the comms. It was the human commander. "We're not done yet," he said with quiet determination. "Fire everything." A massive barrage of firepower erupted from the human ships, more intense than anything Threx had ever seen. The humans' weapons turned their fiery gaze on the Xantorian flagship. A direct hit. The blast was so intense, the space around the flagship seemed to warp as its shields shattered in an instant. The energy pulse faltered. The Xantorians had miscalculated. Their final weapon was ineffective against the sheer force of the Deathworlders. As the flagship was crippled, Threx felt a sense of disbelief wash over him. They had done it. The Deathworlders had not only stopped the attack, but had managed to turn the tide in a matter of moments. The battle wasn't over, but it had shifted in their favor. "Finish them," the human commander's voice echoed again, his words cold and resolute. And with that, the Deathworlders pressed forward, unstoppable. The battle had shifted. The Xantorian fleet, once so proud, now fought with desperation. Their flagship, now crippled, was adrift, vulnerable to the relentless onslaught from the Deathworlder fleet. But they weren't finished yet. There was a fire still burning in the heart of the Xantorian warriors. Despite the odds, they had one last trick up their sleeve. But the Deathworlders were not intimidated. The human fleet surged forward, their ships cutting through space with unmatched ferocity. The sound of weaponry clashing, of explosions filling the void, reverberated across the galaxy, signaling a pivotal turning point in this war. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to annihilate their enemy completely. Threx stood in the war room, staring at the tactical map projected in front of him. He could see it now, every move of the Deathworlders, every advance, every calculated strike. They weren't just reacting, they were planning. The sheer power of the human fleet, combined with the tactical genius of the Deathworlders, was something the Xantorians had never prepared for. They thought they had seen war, but this was different. "I can't believe it," Threx muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. They're making it look easy." The fleet of Deathworlder ships moved in tight formation, their strategies syncing together like a well-oiled machine. The Xantorian forces, trying to regroup, failed to keep up with the human ingenuity and precision. Even though they had superior numbers, they couldn't match the Deathworlders' resilience and determination. Every moment that passed, the Xantorians lost ground. It was like watching a herd of predators circle their prey, tightening the noose with every passing second. The communications officer spoke up, his voice tense. "Sir, the Xantorian reinforcements have arrived." Frex's heart skipped a beat. The Xantorians had pulled in their last reserves. It was all or nothing now. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. With the new reinforcements, the Xantorians might regain their momentum. If the Deathworlders faltered now, they could lose everything. The reinforcements came into view, massive ships, brimming with firepower. Their presence sent a shockwave of fear through the remaining Xantorian ships. But then something happened that shocked everyone, even Threx. The Deathworlders didn't flinch. "We'll need everything we have," came the voice of the human commander once again. His tone was calm, confident, and most importantly, resolute. The human ships didn't slow. They didn't retreat. They charged forward, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. Frex watched as the first wave of Xantorian reinforcements was obliterated within seconds. The human fleet moved like a single unit, each ship perfectly synchronized with the others. They were not just a group of warriors. They were a single force, unstoppable. A tremor ran through Threx as he realized what was happening. This was no longer a battle. This was an execution. The Deathworlders were systematically tearing the Xantorian fleet apart. We can't win this," the Xantorian commander on the flagship muttered to his officers, his voice barely a whisper of despair. The reinforcements were falling apart. The Deathworlders' sheer will to fight had them on the edge of annihilation. But Threx couldn't look away. He could feel the raw power emanating from the human fleet. It was like a tide of unrelenting energy, washing over everything in its path. The Deathworlders were fighting with a savagery and speed that was beyond anything the Xantorians had ever seen. The human fleet was everywhere, striking fast and hard. They didn't give their enemies a second to breathe. One of the Xantorian battleships exploded in a spectacular blast, sending fragments of the ship scattering across the void. Threx flinched at the sight. The Deathworlders were not just defeating their enemies. They were utterly decimating them. The entire fleet was collapsing, one ship at a time. As the last remnants of the Xantorian fleet drifted into the void, the galaxy held its breath. The void was silent, save for the faint hum of the Deathworlder ships, now victorious but solemn. It was an eerie calm, a victory won, but not without cost. The ships of the Deathworlder fleet hung in the space where the Xantorian forces once were, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows over the remnants of what had been a proud military. Threx was still at the command center of the flagship, his mind racing. He had witnessed the Deathworlders' power firsthand, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this moment than just a military victory. The battle was over, but the war was not. "The Xantorians have been wiped out," his communications officer said, his voice low. "But the Galactic Alliance is already sending reinforcements to the outer colonies. They'll be here in a matter of days." Threx didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the stars outside the viewport. The galaxy was on the brink of something far bigger than a single war. The balance of power had shifted, and the Deathworlders had proven they were capable of far more than just brute force. The Alliance knew it, and that knowledge would spread like wildfire. The humans, Threx muttered to himself. What are they really after? It was a question that had been haunting him for days. The Deathworlders had shown no interest in taking over the galaxy. They hadn't plundered the Xantorian territories. In fact, they'd shown no desire to even expand. All they'd done was protect, no, destroy, the Xantorians. But for what purpose? He remembered the conversation he'd overheard just before the battle began. The human commander, his voice calm and direct, had spoken of something greater, something beyond this galaxy. The Deathworlders aren't just here to conquer, the human had said. They're here to protect. And if the galaxy doesn't understand that, then we'll make them understand. Threx recalled the way the human leader had looked at him, cold eyes, yet filled with a quiet resolve. It had unsettled him in a way he couldn't describe. As the Deathworlder ships continued to patrol the space around them, there was no celebration. There were no medals or banners for the soldiers who had fought. Instead, there was only a sense of solemn duty. The Deathworlders had accomplished their mission, but in the back of their minds, they knew something far greater was coming. The fleet began to move once again, this time toward the galactic core. Threx was still at the heart of the command center when the message came through. A direct transmission from the leader of the Galactic Council. Threx, the voice said, we need to discuss the future. The Xantorians have been defeated, but the real question is, what happens next? He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the galaxy would begin to understand the true nature of the Deathworlders. The truth was, the Deathworlders had not been invited to the galaxy. They had not sought out this war. They were not interested in domination. They were something entirely different, something the galaxy had never seen before. But now, after the battle was won, it was clear. The Deathworlders had made their presence known, and the galaxy would have to live with the consequences of that presence. He opened his eyes, locking them onto the image of the Galactic Council leader on the screen. They're coming, Threx said, his voice almost a whisper. The leader raised an eyebrow. Who? The Deathworlders, Threx replied. They've only just begun. The aftermath of the Xantorian defeat lingered in the air like a storm cloud, its tension palpable, even in the far reaches of space. The galaxy's balance had shifted, and for the first time in a long while, many species felt an overwhelming uncertainty. What would happen now? Would the Deathworlders, after their display of unimaginable power, continue to protect? Or would they become the galaxy's new rulers? Threx stood at the helm of his ship once more, staring out into the black void. His eyes, once filled with confidence, now reflected a deep uncertainty. The Xantorian fleet was gone, but the galaxy was not yet safe. The Galactic Council had made it clear. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. This isn't over, Threx muttered to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet hum of the command center. It wasn't just the defeat of the Xantorians that worried him. It was the way the Deathworlders had handled the situation. There had been no mercy, no diplomatic negotiations, just the overwhelming force of a fleet that seemed unstoppable. They had obliterated the enemy without hesitation, leaving nothing behind but devastation. And in the aftermath, they had shown no desire to expand, no need for recognition. The Deathworlders were not like the other galactic species. They were different. The transmission from the Galactic Council had come in shortly after the last battle was won. The message was clear. Threx had been summoned to a summit with the most powerful leaders in the galaxy. They wanted answers. They wanted to know what role the Deathworlders would play in the future of the galaxy. But Threx knew something the Council didn't. The Deathworlders were not here for control. They were not here to rule. No, their presence was a warning that the galaxy was teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Ready the ship for departure, Threx ordered, his voice cutting through the quiet tension in the room. We leave for the Council tomorrow. As the ship's crew scrambled to make preparations, Threx couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was in motion. The Deathworlders were not just fighting to defend this galaxy. They were preparing for something that had yet to come. The next day, Threx stood before the Council. The leaders of the galaxy's most powerful factions gathered around him. Their faces were filled with concern, but there was also an air of arrogance. After all, they had never been truly threatened before. They had always controlled the galaxy. They had always been the ones in power. But now, as Threx stood before them, they were more aware than ever that the Deathworlders were not to be taken lightly. "I've come to deliver a message," Threx began, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "The Deathworlders are not here for conquest. They are here for protection. They did not come to destroy, but to ensure the survival of those who are weak. The Xantorians were just the beginning." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "The Deathworlders have seen what the galaxy is capable of. They have seen the chaos that can unfold when one species believes they are superior to all others. They will not stand by and watch it happen again." The council shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Some were skeptical, others fearful, but none dared to interrupt. Threx had seen the power of the Deathworlders firsthand. He knew what they were capable of, and he knew that the galaxy had just been given a stark reminder that there were forces beyond their understanding. "What are you saying, Threx?" one of the council leaders asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What are they preparing for?" Threx looked each leader in the eye. He could see the fear in their gazes, the realization dawning on them. This wasn't just about the Deathworlders protecting the weak. No, this was about something far more dangerous. The galaxy's fragile peace was on the brink of collapse, and the Deathworlders had the power to ensure that balance was shattered forever. "They're preparing for the future," Threx said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "And they will not let the galaxy fall into chaos again." The leaders exchanged worried looks, but no one spoke. It was clear that Threx's words had struck a chord. The Deathworlders were not here as conquerors. They were something else entirely. They were a force of nature, capable of wiping out entire civilizations in the blink of an eye, but also capable of saving the galaxy from its own self-destruction. The council meeting ended without resolution. No one knew what to do with the information Threx had shared. The galaxy was no longer in the hands of the council's leaders. The Deathworlders had shown their might, and now they held the power to decide the fate of the entire galaxy. As Threx left the council chamber, his mind raced. He had never seen the galaxy so uncertain. But there was one thing he was sure of. The Deathworlders would not allow this galaxy to tear itself apart. Whatever was coming, they would stand ready. And the galaxy would have to decide whether it was willing to stand with them or face the consequences. The tension in the council chamber was suffocating. The leaders of the galaxy's most influential factions sat in silence, each pondering Threx's unsettling words. He had warned them, made it clear that the Deathworlders were not just watching from the sidelines. They were actively preparing for something far beyond the galaxy's current conflicts. But what exactly was coming? Threx could feel their eyes on him. The looks of uncertainty, fear, and even disbelief were all too familiar now. The Deathworlders had shown their power. They had proven that they were capable of stopping entire civilizations in their tracks. But Threx knew this wasn't the full story. He had seen the first signs. He had felt the shift. The Deathworlders weren't just preparing for the next galactic war. They were preparing for something much darker, something that none of them could even begin to comprehend. "What do you mean by the future?" A voice broke through the silence. It was Karas, the leader of the Glenfar Federation. His race had long been known for its strategic mind, and even now his sharp eyes watched Threx intently. What are they really preparing for? Threx took a deep breath. He had never been one to sugarcoat things, but the reality of the situation was far more dangerous than even he had anticipated. The Deathworlders had an intelligence that ran deeper than any of the galaxy's species. They understood threats that were still hidden to everyone else. "The Deathworlders aren't preparing for a war," Threx said, his voice calm but firm. "They're preparing for a force that is beyond our reach, beyond our comprehension." A murmur rippled through the room. The leaders exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to interrupt. "You're telling us," Karas said slowly, "that there's something out there, something even the Deathworlders fear." Threx nodded, his face grim. "Yes, it's not just the Xantorians or any other threat we've faced. It's something older, something that predates all of us. The Deathworlders have encountered this force before, and they know what it's capable of. But even they aren't certain they can stop it alone. The room fell into stunned silence. Every leader present was well aware of the Deathworlders' strength, but the idea of them being uncertain, of them not being able to handle a threat, was unimaginable. The Deathworlders had obliterated their enemies with ruthless precision. The galaxy had never seen a force like them. So what could possibly be so powerful that it made even them nervous? Frex continued, his eyes locking with each of the leaders as he spoke. This isn't a fight for territory, for power, or for control. It's a fight for survival. The Deathworlders have fought wars, faced extinction, and survived worlds that could tear lesser species apart. But this force, it is not something that can be defeated by power alone. The implications of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. If even the Deathworlders weren't sure about their chances, what hope did the galaxy have? What do you suggest we do? Karaz asked quietly, his voice edged with both concern and curiosity. How do we prepare for something like this? Frex paused, gathering his thoughts. He had no easy answers. The Deathworlders were preparing as best as they could, but even they knew that they couldn't take on this enemy alone. The galaxy's survival would depend on unity. It would depend on all of them working together. But could they? The years of mistrust, of battles over resources and power, would not be so easily forgotten. The first step, Frex said slowly, is to trust the Deathworlders. We have to put aside our fears and work with them, not against them. They've already shown us their willingness to fight for the galaxy. Now it's time for us to show them that we're willing to stand with them, no matter the cost. A heavy silence followed his words. The leaders of the galaxy's factions were no strangers to distrust and competition. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. If the Deathworlders were willing to fight this unknown enemy, they couldn't afford to stand apart. The galaxy had to come together, or face total annihilation. We will need more than just a united front, Frex added, his voice low. We need to prepare for an enemy that might not even come from this galaxy. This is bigger than us. We need to learn everything we can about what we're up against, and we need to do it quickly. He turned toward the holographic map that displayed the galaxy's many systems, his fingers tracing the paths of potential travel routes, places where the enemy might strike first. But even then, we have no guarantee that our forces will be enough. It might not just be a war we're preparing for. Frex continued, his gaze distant. We may be preparing for something even more terrifying. An invasion of a kind we've never experienced before. The other leaders exchanged looks once again. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Everyone knew they were standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss. The threat was real, and there was no escaping it. The Deathworlders had shown their power, but the true nature of the enemy remained a mystery. The galaxy's fate was no longer in their hands alone. It was in the hands of something far greater, and no one was prepared for what was coming next.